I went back to where it all started. To where I was born dead, and to where I was somehow brought back. I told my parents I was going out of town for my birthday, bought plane tickets, and rented a car when I landed. I drove to a modest-sized town with a single hospital. In my jacket pocket were copies of my birth certificate and my death certificate. I was born 12 minutes after midnight, according to my birth certificate. My parents finally told me that wasn't true. I was born at midnight, but I was quickly whisked away and returned later with no explanation. 12:12 a.m. is the time that was written on my birth certificate, and my parents didn't find out the truth until they left the hospital and found a death certificate left under their windshield wiper. Filled out, but never filed. I talked with Dad some more over the past year about this. Mum doesn't want to talk about it. She's trying to forget it ever happened, I think. But Dad is still mad after all these years. All these years later, angry about how he never got answers, about how the hospital blocked his attempts to contact the doctor that filled out the death certificate at every turn. We talked quite a bit about this, and once I was convinced I knew everything, I started doing some digging of my own. The doctor in question no longer works there. He unfortunately has a common enough name that I was unable to find where he moved to. That's a dead end. Similarly, I made no progress with the hospital administration. The best I got was a half-hearted admission that perhaps some paperwork was filled erroneously and some miscommunication happened. But that was so long ago, and it was unlikely anyone that remembered what happened still worked there. They understood my frustration, they told me, but it'd just be one of those things I'd never find out. I wish I could just learn to accept that and move on. I would, if the stakes weren't so high. But every year, in those 12 minutes, the void comes for me, trying to undo whatever mistake was made all those years back. Last year, I lost my friend. She simply ceased to exist. I'm not going to let the void take anyone else, and I certainly am not going to let it take me. I'm tired of greeting my birthday with dread every year. I'm sick of having to run from death. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. And you know what? I really don't like running. It's a shitty hobby. I can't believe people do this for fun. I planned my trip to give me a few days in advance of my birthday to scout out the hospital. My plan was to wander over to the nursery, and if I got caught by a nurse, just pretend I was lost. When I got to that part of the hospital, I realised it was a lot newer than the rest of the building. I quickly found a fancy sign that thanked the generous donors that made the addition possible. It was built 5 years ago, so that obviously wasn't what I was looking for. I went back to the main entrance and chatted with the person at the desk after that, when it looked like he wasn't very busy. I was waiting for my aunt to get out of surgery, I said, but was just killing time. Then I casually asked what was made out of the old nursery wing, because my mother used to work there before she retired. It was all just inpatient rooms now, he said. Might even be where my aunt wound up. Once surgery was done, I got the floor number from him and then made my excuses to leave. Not that he cared. It's amazing how easy it is to just walk around somewhere when you look like you know what you're doing. I scouted the floor, but didn't see anything unusual. I mean, I didn't expect to. If there was anything weird going on, then I'm sure someone would have noticed it by now. I was more just trying to find out if there was a decent escape route. I didn't want to run down the hallway in case anyone saw me, so my plan is to just head down the stairwell. Just watching it through the day, it was clear hardly anyone used it, so I wouldn't run into anyone. I'm not very confident in how fast I'll be on the stairs. I mean, I'm in great shape from running all the time, but it's still a heck of a gamble to take. But I just feel like if I don't take this opportunity to find out more of what's happening, I'll be running from this for my entire life. I hate living in fear of this one night for the rest of the year. I have to do something. So, I've got my route. And that brings us up to date. I've scheduled this to automatically post, so if there's nothing after this bit, that means I wasn't fast enough. No, scratch that. Can't tell you how glad I am to be able to say that. I'm still shaking from adrenaline, so I'll just finish this up with an update. and maybe by then I'll have calmed down enough to go to bed. I waited until midnight. I kept an eye on my watch so I could count down the very seconds. I was poised to flee as soon as anything came at me. As midnight approached, I felt something pressing down around me, like the pressure change from an airplane taking off. I swallowed, and my ears popped. I heard a sound like a bubbling, like a hot tub somewhere was running, except it was all around me. Then it was midnight and there was nothing to run from. The void had swallowed up the entire hospital. One minute I was standing alone with a harsh fluorescent light illuminating the drab walls, and the next, it had all changed. It was like every surface was dipped in ink. The darkness ran together, and I could no longer see where the walls joined the floor. The overhead light still shone, but the walls and the floor simply swallowed up all the light. It was like staring at a single flat plane that just went on and on into eternity. I could only stare at it for a few seconds before vertigo made my head swim, and I desperately squeezed my eyes shut and put out a hand, trying to ground myself with the feel of the wall. The texture of the once beige paint beneath my fingers was the only thing that reassured me that I was still in this world. The pressure around me was increasing. It felt hard to breathe. I opened my eyes and desperately looked for the stairwell. I had to get out of here. I had to escape before the void closed again and took me with it. I didn't know if that was what would happen, but it was what I was thinking, panicking as my worst fears were realised. I was in the void. I'd made a terrible, fatal error. This was all I could think of. I found the door to the stairs by feel. My hands passed over the frame, indistinguishable from the rest of the blackness, and then found the bar that opened them. I stared down into an abyss, an empty hole in the world. Tentatively, I slid one foot forwards and felt stable ground. Another. I waved my hands out in front of me, desperately seeking the railing of the stairs. My brain was screaming at me that I was standing on nothingness, that the ground beneath me couldn't possibly be solid, and I was too scared to even lift my foot. I shuffled awkwardly forward until I found the railing, and then I clung to it like I was drowning. The first step was the hardest. I located the edge with my toes and then gingerly lowered myself down. After that, I let my body take over, as I knew by instinct how tall each step would be. I reached the first landing and pivoted around to the next set, my hands clutched tight on the railing I could not see. Ahead of me was the next floor. I could see its landing clearly. The void ended a few steps away. The hands grabbed me at the border. The void squeezed hold of my ankles, my arms, my clothing. It didn't want me to leave. I twisted in their grasp, my throat seized up with terror so that I could barely breathe, much less scream. I let go of the railing to strike at them, trying to break their hold. The ones I hit shattered like glass, but there was still more pouring out of the void to replace them. They seized my hair, and then fingers wrapped around my neck. My watch beeped at me as the timer I set went off. 11 minutes and 50 seconds after midnight. In desperation, I shoved off the step and let the weight of my body carry me forward. And then it was 12 minutes after midnight as I stumbled forward into the light and out of the void. I only fell 4 steps, thankfully. It still hurt. I was so shocked by that point that I just lay there, panting and staring at the walls. I barely registered the pain. I was just grateful to be alive. "Ma'am?" a voice above me said. I blinked, reeling. There was a nurse kneeling over me, watching me with concern. I must have been a sight, on the ground, pale, shaking, dripping in cold sweat. I tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come, so she helped me to get up and sit on one of the stairs. She asked a few things, I can't remember quite what, to make sure I wasn't hurt, and we sat side by side for a moment while I recovered my wits. I asked her if she'd seen anything, when my heart had slowed down enough that I could catch my breath. Something that couldn't be explained. She said she hadn't with the reflexive ease that I have to suspect. She'd said this many times before, perhaps to patients that were awake at midnight. Maybe it was because I was freaked out and not thinking straight. Because I did something risky. I took out the copies of my birth and death certificate and handed them to her. I told her I died here, right at midnight, that no one told my parents, at least not in an official capacity. She looked close to my age, so I wasn't sure what I was hoping to accomplish. Everyone that worked here during my birth was likely long gone before she came to the hospital. She smoothed out the creases in the paper and drew in a sharp breath. I didn't see anything, she said, but something felt wrong. It always does when midnight comes around. She paused and took a deep breath. It felt especially wrong tonight. I was scared to go upstairs, and then there you were, like you appeared out of thin air. Then she asked me what I saw. So I told her. There was a rumour, she said, among the hospital nurses. The doctors don't pay it any heed, but the nurses and the rest of the staff that control where patients are placed do. No one that has any risk of dying are placed in these rooms. They call it the Bermuda Triangle. A little cluster of roughly a dozen rooms where the outcomes are never good. And the funny thing is, she said, that before everyone started being careful about what patients went into these rooms, the people in them always died at the same time. Midnight. I asked how long this had been going on. My heart hammered in my chest. Did it start with my birth? Or did it cause my death? She doesn't know, but she's going to try to find out. She lost a patient, she said, years ago when she first started working there. He coded and died in under a minute, as soon as the clock struck 12. She'd reviewed it over and over in her head, trying to find out what went wrong, what she'd missed, that he could have deteriorated so quietly as the night progressed. Then an older nurse pulled her aside and told her it wasn't her fault, that they put him in the triangle, and that was on them. She didn't want to believe it, not at first. But, she said quietly, staring down the empty hallway, something always felt off about this part of the hospital. She didn't seem to want to elaborate, and I didn't pry. I was emotionally drained enough already. I gave her my number and got hers in return. We're going to keep in touch. She's going to try to find out more, and I promise to help her however I can as well. And when next year rolls around, well, maybe we'll have a better idea of what we're dealing with.